When you come to the Gulf Branch Nature Center, find a place to park, take a look around, and you will see the trail running back past the pond. Watch your footing, check out the old cabin, and welcome to the Gulf Branch Forge. Come inside to the Blacksmith Shop and Blacksmith Guild of the Potomac. Welcome to the Beginner's Blacksmithing class at Blacksmith Guild of the Potomac. My name's Chris. I'll be your instructor. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the shop, our tools, safety rules, so you can have a successful class. So the ABCs of blacksmithing. A stands for attitude. How you show up tends to translate into your work. If you arrive in a good mood, you're going to see that in what you do on the anvil. I know when I show up to the shop and I'm in a bad mood, it shows in my work. So I always try and take a few minutes in the parking lot just to remember why I'm here. I get to hit stuff with a hammer. B is for beginning. Remembering that we're a beginner means that we take it easy on ourselves. And as we're doing our work, just remember that every project is your first. You haven't made a leaf before, you haven't made a nail before, so the first one's going to look like a Mark I potato, and that's fine. That's what we're here to do, is learn. As we leave a little room for mistakes and not be too critical, pay attention to what you like and what you don't like about your work. And then pay attention to what to do to make the next one better. Come back in your own time and practice. And that's what makes for much better blacksmithing. As for the C, well, there's 4 of them actually. And the first is to conceive. What are we going to do? Now in this shop, we've got the projects lined up for you already. But when you're doing your own work, have an idea of what it is you want to make. You don't have to be a great artist, but being able to at least sketch out an idea of what you want to create and allow yourself to follow that form instead of just hitting things randomly will get you a long way. Contemplate what you're going to do. How much material do you need? What kinds of material do you want? Are there any special techniques or moves that you have to employ? Are you going to need a helper? How much time is it going to take? Come in with a plan. The third C, create. You got to get started. Get the forge hot, get your tools ready, and start working. Every project begins somewhere. Finally, the 4th C, critique. Be willing to critique your own work. Be willing to ask other smiths what they think of it. And don't take it personally, because every one of these projects is an expression or an experiment or a beginning in our case. Learn to learn from your mistakes and listen to other people's opinions and see where maybe you can improve. That's how all of us get along. And over the 20-some years I've been doing this, it's listening to experts that's gotten me this far. All right, I'm going to introduce you to some of the things in the forge here. First, right in front of me, there's the anvil. The anvil is our basic tool. It is the original 3D printer. And the fundamental of blacksmithing is to evoke an image out of your mind into the real world. And this is probably the most critical skill any of us can have. It's not about how strong your arm is, but it's about how you can visualize something and make it. Now let's look at some of the tools in the shop. The first one is our anvil. This is a fairly large example of one. It's a London pattern anvil, which means it has a face, a step, and a horn. And that allows me to do a lot of work. Where most of the power comes from is all this mass right below the face. That's going to make my hammer rebound. And that means I have to do a lot less physical effort in order to get things going. This square hole is called the Hardy hole. We have special tooling that can fit in there and do a variety of jobs. This round hole is called the Pritchell hole. We use that for punching and having a little space for tools to go through while having enough mass underneath it to support the work. In my hand is a hammer. This is my favorite blacksmithing hammer, and most of the ones on the rack look a little bit different, but that's okay. My hammer has 2 different sides. This one is a bit flatter. This one is a bit rounder. And between these two, I can do a lot of different maneuvers by holding my hammer at different angles. That's a talent that one picks up and a skill that one develops over time. When I'm tapering steel, as you'll see shortly, if I angle my hammer a certain way, I'm going to pinch the metal in one direction. I can alter that as I want, and as I strike my hammer down, that's going to control how I form the metal. I tend to hold this hammer pretty close to the head because of the way it's balanced. This is a cross peen hammer, and this is the peen, spelled P-E-I-N. It's basically a shape that allows me to dent metal in one direction so that when I hammer it flat again, it stretches out, almost like uncorrugating something. We have cross peens, there's straight peens, angled peens, and it'll have a regular face and this fairly sharp face in order to do different kinds of work. When you're going to hold your hammer for hours and do a lot of work and you don't want to beat up your wrist or your arm, there's one really good way of holding it. You'll notice that this handle has a bit of a swell right here, and that's where I want about the crease of my middle finger to wrap around. How I want to grab the hammer is straight across from me, over the top, wrap my fingers and my thumb up, and then bring the hammer forward. Doing this, holding it with my thumb in line, allows me to do a lot of work with the majority of my arm and not my wrist. Holding a hammer straight out like a baseball bat, as if I'm gonna go play the World Series here, puts an awful lot of stress on this tendon, and it forces you to use the wrist an awful lot. Using the wrist in this tomahawk motion really prevents the range of motion of the hand, and I'm gonna hurt myself if I try to exceed that. Gripping the hammer forward, almost like a motorcycle grip, I have a much greater range of motion in my wrist, and it gives me more flexibility, more control, and more power at the end of the day. When one's working at the anvil, you want your upper body to be as close to the anvil as possible. In this case, I'm looking straight down with my eyes at the middle of the table or the face where I'm going to be doing my work. As I hold my hammer, instead of trying to do everything with my wrist, which is okay for light work, to actually put some energy into this, I'm going to use my entire arm like a piston, and I'm going to drive the hammer without it changing its angle much. I can strike much harder and for longer by using these muscles in my shoulder instead of trying to exercise my forearm and my wrist. Whichever anvil you're going to work at, you want to find a comfortable place to stand. In this case, I have my forge, so I'm going to be taking a step this way, and I'm going to be coming back to work. I'm going to be holding my hot work here, hammering here, but I don't want it way out in front of me like this. If I have to reach to do anything, I'm not going to have the control, I'm not going to have the strength. So, belly up to it, get close, put a foot off the other side if you need to, maybe even prop your hip against it, and that way you can hold your hot work here, look straight down, and have all the power and control nice and close. So a couple of words about safety. First thing is, how do we dress? In the shop, it's dirty. We're burning coal. There's a lot of dust everywhere. Every surface in here is going to get some on you by the end of the day. Make sure you've taken off your good work clothes and you've put on something that's both fire resistant and that you don't care that much about whether it gets dirty or ripped or torn or burned a little. Cheap t-shirt is great. Cotton is good. Wool's obviously best, but Virginia summers make that kind of hard to do. Jeans are a good choice for pants. Closed-toe shoes, I prefer leather. These are my shop shoes. They're nothing fancy, but they keep my feet protected and I don't care how dirty they get. Old pair of jeans, no holes please, but just something to cover yourself with, and a t-shirt that you don't mind if it gets a little bit of hot metal on it. You want to avoid wearing anything that might melt. So nylon, rayon, yoga pants, sweatpants, shorts, most of those are right out. Anything that can melt when hot iron hits it is a bad idea. Not only does it ruin the clothing, but it could also stick to you. And in the worst case, catch on fire and melt into your skin, and that's nasty. There's a non-zero risk that you might get burnt in this class, and that's okay. We've got a first aid kit, which I'll show you in a second. but most of the time those burns happen quickly and aren't too serious. Most of the worst burns come when metal is still black, because metal doesn't begin to incandesce until it's about 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Very few people burn themselves on glowing bright metal, because obviously I shouldn't touch that. But if you look at all this rack of tools over here, they all look black. They could be 800-900 degrees hot, and you just don't know. So before you come up to any tool and just grab it, you want to come in with the back of your hand and see if you can feel any heat radiating off of it. This is why the handles are down low and away from the top. Give it a little tap, make sure it's room temperature, and then grab the tool. Again, the handle area might be cool, and the working end might still be hot. That's why we have buckets of water here. We can try and cool our tools regularly and make sure everybody's safe. I'll send an image of this to everybody, but over here we've got a little sign up on the wall that shows the exact address of the shop here. That's what we need to give 911 so the fire department knows actually to come up here and not try and take care of somebody down at the nature center. Everybody gets a copy of that. Have it on your phone, have it ready. We have a first aid kit. I know pretty much everything that's in it and how to use it. We've got paper towels, we have sanitation gear, we have earplugs. Basic safety gear should include something to protect your eyes. Now I'm wearing glasses, and that's good enough. If you don't wear glasses, a pair of safety goggles is necessary. Ear protection is personal choice. It makes it a little harder to hear when we're trying to teach and talk to each other, but if you find the noise of the shop is too much, that's great. We'll just speak up. It's May 2021, and we're still required to wear masks in Arlington County here in the shop. I'm not doing that right now for the video, but in class we will all be masked for this running. One of my go-to pieces of safety equipment is a good pair of gloves. These are not terribly heavy duty, they're thin, but they're leather, which means I'm not going to burn myself readily. It gives me a few extra seconds to touch something hot without hurting myself. It lets me mess around with the coal fire without hurting myself. I find it's thin enough, unlike those heavy-duty work gloves or welding gloves, that I can still feel my hammer and have a lot of control with it. Whether you wear gloves or not is up to you. This is a personal choice. Go ahead and try it both ways. In the back of the shop, we have some learners, but an apron is also a really great tool. It comes in handy anytime things are flying about or you're working really fast and you are worried about your clothing or your own safety a little bit. My apron is made out of heavy leather, and this will stop pretty much anything in the shop from hurting my front area. This is a coal forge. This is where we do all our work. A couple other kinds are run on charcoal, some run on propane. This is what we have here at the shop. There's a couple of different forms of coal. The first is bituminous, which is this stuff, which means it's a little on the brittle side. The other is anthracite, and that's heating coal, and it doesn't really work well for forging. And there is a real difference in how it works. Raw coal like this, we actually call green coal, even though it's jet black. But it has a lot of impurities in it. There's sulfur, there's a lot of other volatile compounds, basically everything that is at the bottom of the bog. And what we're after is the carbon. And what happens is once you cook that a little bit and get everything that isn't carbon out of it, you get this, which is called coke. That's the form of coal where all the volatiles are off. All we're left with is sort of a real spongy carbon substance. And this is what burns really, really hot and gives us our incredible heat. And so when we're starting a coal forge, we always like it if somebody leaves some of the coke from the last fire here to make the lighting a little bit easier. Lighting a coal forge with nothing but green coal takes a little bit more time, a little bit more effort. What we're going to do is roll up some newspaper, get a few sticks of kindling. I'm going to light the paper, paper's going to light the wood, wood is going to light the coal. Behind me here, I have from 1904 Buffalo Champion Forge blower. And this just runs off a hand crank and spins a fan back here. Now the great part of this is it doesn't care which direction it's going. So whatever my preference is, air is going to blow down that pipe and up through the bottom of this. There's one other part of this called the clinker breaker. You want to come in and look at this. You'll notice there's this little tool here made out of cast iron, and everything that's in the coal that burns down and turns into glass can clog that up. So every now and then I'm just going to give that a flip, break things up, and keep my fire running nice and healthy. You'll see how this works when we actually get to work. So I am going to take one piece of paper, and I'm going to roll it up kind of like a frisbee. Curve the edges around. So I have sort of a plate, and that little tear in the middle is actually perfect, because that's where I'm going to lay it. The other one I'm just going to ball up loose, and that'll go in the middle once this gets going. Find a lighter. It's always a good thing to have one with you, because even though there's some in the shop, invariably they're always empty or dry or missing. So, just going to light that bit of paper there, drop it in the middle, throw this other wad of paper there. I'm just going to use my kindling, Boy Scout style, and build myself a little wooden fire. Eventually all this smoke will start going up the chimney and not choke us out. Now I want to be really careful with the air, but just like a campfire, when you blow on it, the fire gets a little hotter. Just a small little crank. That burning paper will light my wood. And once I see my wood starting to go, I'm going to take my coal, take my little rake here, and just start pushing a little bit in around the edge. I don't want to bury this. This is a slow, gentle starting process at first. Anybody watch that volcano in Iceland? That's kind of what we're going for here. Nice hot middle and a bit of a built-up edge. As you can see, my paper's pretty much gone. Now my wood is burning. I can give it a little bit more air. As my wood burns, that's going to light the coal on fire. Now if I get a few pieces of this fresh raw coal in there, you'll see them give off a lot more gas and vapor. You get a whitish, greenish smoke, and that's all the other junk in the coal burning off. Sometimes you want to take your shovel, put a little bit right around the back, but never am I going to choke out the middle. More fueling closer. Don't want to choke it, don't want to bury it. Always leave it room to breathe. Sometimes when it's a little more humid in here, it takes a little bit longer to start, because all that water has to get driven off too. Being able to make a nice, short, hot wood fire is really important. If I need to adjust the middle of my fire, I'm going to use this poker. I just sort of go straight down the end, kick things around, make sure it's got a breathing hole, and then straight out. I'm not going to rake through my fire much with that. At the start of our fire, our flames are going to be this dark, sooty orange. As things get hotter, that flame is going to become much cleaner and much lighter. You can see this smoke coming off the back where I'm cooking the volatiles off of raw coal, even though I've got coke going here in the middle. just burning pure coal. You can see that flame is getting stronger and lighter, even though I've got a lot of smoke around it. We've got a clean burning coke fire at the heart. I just want to do this for a few minutes to make sure it's well established. Coal is not going to put itself out right away. It will sit there and burn. It is a fossil fuel. It's mineralized carbon and all the other junk. There's tar in there, there's sulfur in there, silica, Lord knows what else. But I can leave this and I can walk away for 10, 15 minutes without having to worry about it. Any longer, I want to come back and give it a little spin. So if I have to walk away and do something somewhere else, I don't need to worry about my fire going out as long as I'm coming back once it's well established. This is a bit fresh still. All right, this fire is about ready to get some work done. One of the things that's going to be really hard to talk about on video, but you'll have to learn in class and through your own experience, is fire management. As we work through the night, across 3, 4, 5 hours, the character of this is going to change. Fuel's going to burn down, you're going to get all the other waste products collecting, you're going to have to clean things out, find clinker at the bottom of it that's blocking your airflow. So if after a while you're sitting there cranking and nothing's happening, it's time to clean out your fire pit. I'll try and show you that later. For now, let's hit some steel. So we're going to start heating up this piece of steel. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to forge a taper. I'm going to go straight into the hot spot of my fire and give it some cranks. While I'm cranking, I want to be looking in to make sure that my steel doesn't get too hot. I'm going to show you a couple different color temperatures. Hopefully the camera catches them. But there is such a thing as too hot. And if I start cranking this and get distracted and talk to somebody too much, I might burn up my work.
Oh, it's catching it.
Now that this steel is glowing, that's probably about 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Back here where it's not glowing, it's still about 800, and I don't want to touch that with my bare finger. To forge though, we want to be up a little beyond 2000. There are some descriptive terms we use to describe luminosity, and that first dull orange or maybe cherry red is going to give way to more of a bright orange, like this. It's better if you look at it against the dark background than against the fire. I'm going to put it back in, and I'm going to bring it up closer to yellow heat. There's something called a white heat, even though it isn't literally white. It's just as hot as it's going to get. You'll see just how bright it is. That's a nice bright orange at the tip, and that's a good forging temperature. I'm going to get this a little hotter though, just to show you how hot this coal forge will get us in relatively short time. That's a white heat. You can see how the surface is almost bubbly. Any hotter than that, I'm going to start burning the carbon out of the steel, and it will ruin the structure. There's really no coming back from that. You just have to cut it off and carry it on. So, to make sure I've got a nice, comfortable heat, and then I'm going to move over here to the anvil. To forge our taper, we're just going to come up to our anvil, hold the work right out of this outer edge, tilt it up a little bit, and then tilt my hammer a little bit more. Those blows are going to pinch that to look almost like a screwdriver. going to then rotate it 90 degrees and do the same thing. You see how fast this cools off, which means we have to go back to the forge again. Even though it's still glowing, I can still move it. It's going to get harder and harder, and I'll have a lot more opportunities to make mistakes. This is where that term, strike while the iron is hot, comes from. Again, come in, tilt up, tilt hammer. 3 or 4 sharp blows, rotate, and repeat. And then I've got a reasonably sharp point. What I want to do is make sure that all my surfaces are nice and straight and even, and that's the process that's called dressing the steel. So to dress it is to come back, just make softer adjustment blows to make everything straight and even. I'll get it hot again. So same hammer, same technique, just less force. What you'll notice is every time I hit it, because my hammer is a little bit round and the anvil is flat, the steel is going to curve up like a Pringle chip. And so to counteract that, we have to flip it over and hit whatever part is bowed outwards. So anytime you have something curving away from you the way you don't want it, flip it around and just tap the top of the mountain until it's flat. So for our first project, we're going to make a hook, which means I need this taper to go back about 3 inches. We're going to round that thing around in about a 1-inch circle, so I need a little more than 3 times a circle in order to get that much material that's nicely tapered. So I'm going to go back to the fire, I'm going to heat up this section behind this transition and gently bring that taper back and blend it in. So that's starting to come back. I'm going to do a little bit more and one more heat. And then I'm going to show you how to turn this from a square section into a round section. So now I've got a good 3 inches tapered, and there's no distinct transition between tapered and original size stock. I can look at it and pretty much guess where I've stopped working because there are some hammer marks on the side. From that point out towards the tip, I'm going to start by coming in and punching in these corners a little bit. When the steel is hotter, I need less force. Where the steel is thinner, I need less force. So I'm going to adjust my hammer blows to account for that. I'll work up one side, flip it 90 degrees, work the other side. What you might have noticed by now is I don't have to hit all 4 sides because the anvil mirrors the force that I put in with the hammer. By lifting my work a little bit and angling my hammer, I was able to pinch that evenly. So I only had to work 2 opposing faces. Same thing with the corners. I'll come in, do one set of edges, which will also flatten the bottom side, rotate it 90 degrees, do the other set of edges. So that'll turn it octagonal. Here I go, knocking in one set of corners. hitting harder where it's thicker. And now that I have an 8-sided figure, I'm just going to tap in one place. I'm going to pick a spot on the anvil and keep hitting that. I'm going to rotate the work underneath it. And by tapping in 100 little facets, I'm going to end up with a round cross section. And there you go, about a 3.5 inch section of mostly round tapered steel on the end of a square stick. This is the beginning for so many projects I can't even count them. This is great for fire pokers, this is great for magic wands. In our case, it's good for a hook, because we're going to take this and curl it up so I can then hang my jacket on it, and we'll make the rest of it out of what's still yet to be forged. Especially while we're forging in the summer, but any time of year, it's important to stay hydrated. Now, one of the hard things about working here is we do not have a public toilet accessible during our class hours, so we don't want to pass out from dehydration, but we don't want to get ourselves in a fix either, so plan accordingly. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to forge a little tip on my curl, so I don't have a sharp point hanging up on my jacket. To do that, come over here to the edge of the anvil, and just start tapping that over and feed it a little bit at a time until it's upright. Then I want to tap that back into itself. This gets more difficult the colder it gets, so you might have to take a couple of heats. Small metal cools down fast. So there I've got my small little curl at the end of my hook. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get this entire tapered section hot, and with this curl facing up, I'm going to forge the rest of it down and over to form the body of my hook. Before I do that, I'm going to take water and cool that very tip so that I can strike it with the hammer without deforming it. And now I have something vaguely hook-shaped. It's not straight and it's not even. So what I'm going to do is use the flatness of the anvil to encourage that to come back into plane with the rest of the steel. Now that's a pretty good beginning of a hook. If you find you need to clean up your curves a little bit, because this is a little pinch there and a little pinch there, you can use the horn. By anchoring the steel up on the horn in 2 places, I can stretch out that curve, I can make some adjustments to it, sort of true it up, and make sure it really is round. And this tool encourages that nice round shape. Get everything back in plane again. And when you're happy with it, then you can call it quits. At least for that part. So for our first hook project, all we're going to do is forge a spike on the end so it can be driven into a wall. This is a colonial drive hook. And we're basically building a nail on the end of this thing. So the first thing I have to do is decide how long it's going to be. For my hooks, I like to take the length of this bow, add that much more, and a bit. I know, real precise. This is as much art as it is engineering. This is where I want the top of my hook to end, which means I need about another inch to turn into the nail before I drive it sideways. On this piece of steel, it's discolored, so I can kind of tell where that's going to be, but once it's hot, I'm not going to see that anymore. Our first tool we're going to use in the Hardy is called the hot cut, because you cut steel while it's hot on this tool. What I'm going to do first, though, is just mark it while it's cold. So right about there where I wanted it, I'm going to take that out, put it up on its corner, and just give it a little tap. And now I've got a notch in there that I'll be able to see when the steel is glowing hot. When it's hot in this area, I'll come back to the hot cut and cut all the way through by striking it with the hammer. Always put your hot cut tools away the minute you're done using them. You don't want to punch down with your hammer and cut your hand. This is the point where we have to start using tongs to hold the work because it's too short now to hold with our bare hands or even gloved hands. So I'm going to find a pair of tongs that fit, and some tongs have nice little shapes that will grab onto other shapes easily. But the point is I need to be able to stick this end into the fire by holding this end and not having it in the way. Just like the beginning of the project, we're going to forge a short square taper. Of course, holding on with one's tongs becomes the new challenge. Now, because this has to drive into wood, I do want that as sharp as possible. And just with hammer and anvil, I'm pretty close there. I'm going to take another heat. I'm going to bend this 90 degrees away from the hook. So this is the outside, goes up into the wall. To do this, I'm simply going to hammer over the side of the anvil. Following it with my hammer, coming back to true things up a little bit. Now you notice it's not quite in plane, so hammer down again on the side of the anvil, using its flatness to encourage everything to get straight again. And that's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. You pull any of these things out of a 18th century cabin, none of them are going to be perfectly straight. So now, the real test is, will it nail? I'm going to get my water bucket, cool it off. And then I got to find a piece of wool to test it in. You may not have this at home, that's okay. Go ahead and just keep this as a memento or a keepsake as your first forging project.